Down on your knees now. The command cracked through the air, sharp enough to make even the wind seem to hesitate. And for a moment the entire street held its breath as red and blue lights washed over the quiet row of parked cars and shuttered storefronts, reflecting off glass and chrome like something unreal, something staged, except it wasn't, because Ava Johnson stood there at the center of it, her boots planted on the cracked asphalt, a small duffel bag resting at her feet, her hands slowly rising, not rushed, not trembling, just measured, as if she had done this before, as if she understood something the officers didn't. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped forward first, his posture rigid, his presence filling the space between them with a kind of practiced authority, one hand hovering near his belt, the other gesturing firmly as he repeated the order, slower this time, like she might not understand, like she might be something unpredictable, and around them the world began to gather. Car doors paused mid. Close, a couple across the street froze beside a flickering street lamp. Someone lifted a phone but didn't yet press record, because something about the moment felt heavier than curiosity. Ava's eyes moved, not quickly, not nervously, just enough to take in the edges of the scene. The patrol car idling behind them, the faint hum of its engine, the way the headlights stretched her shadow long across the pavement, the distant sound of a train horn somewhere beyond the buildings, and then back to the officers, steady, calm, unflinching. There was no anger in her face, no visible fear either, just a quiet stillness that didn't match the tension pressing in from every direction, and that mismatch made Brooks narrow his eyes slightly, as if trying to solve something that refused to fit. "You match the description," he said, voice controlled but edged with certainty, and the words hung there, incomplete, because he didn't explain what description, didn't need to, not in his mind, not in this moment. Ava tilted her head just a fraction, enough that the light caught the side of her face, revealing the faintest trace of a scar near her jawline, something old, something earned, and when she spoke, her voice came low and even, carrying just far enough to reach them without effort. "You're making a mistake." And it wasn't a plea, wasn't defensive, it was simply a statement, the kind that didn't ask to be believed. The air shifted, subtle but real, like the pressure before a storm, and Brooks took another step closer, closing the gap, trying to reclaim control of a moment that felt like it was slipping somewhere he couldn't quite see, while Ava slowly lowered herself to her knees, not in surrender but in compliance, her back straight, her gaze still level, her movements precise, deliberate, almost disciplined, and that was when the quiet grew louder then. The sirens, when even the distant sounds seemed to fall away, leaving only the rhythm of breath, the soft crunch of gravel beneath shifting boots, and something else, something unseen, building just beneath the surface as Ava's fingers brushed lightly against her leg, and her lips parted as if preparing to say something, not loud, not urgent, but exact, like a signal waiting for its moment. The pavement felt colder through Ava Johnson's knees than it should have. Or maybe it was not the temperature at all, but the weight of the moment pressing down through bone and breath, because everything around her had sharpened into detail, the faint ticking of the patrol car engine cooling, the soft static from a radio clipped to Officer Brooks's shoulder, the distant hum of traffic a few blocks over that somehow felt miles away. And still she remained steady, her hands visible, her posture upright, her presence quiet but unyielding. Brooks circled slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to assert control, his boots grinding lightly against gravel as he repositioned himself to keep her centered in his line of sight. And there was something in the way he watched her that went beyond routine, beyond protocol, like he was waiting for a mistake, expecting one. Because in his world moments like this followed a script, and she was not reading from it. Another officer, younger, shifted his weight near the cruiser, glancing at Brooks as if for confirmation, as if unsure whether the stillness in front of them meant compliance or something else entirely, and the silence stretched, thin but unbroken, until Ava drew in a slow breath, not deep enough to be dramatic, just enough to steady something internal, something practiced, and when she exhaled, it came with a calm that did not belong to the tension surrounding her. Her eyes flicked once toward the edge of the street where a narrow alley cut between two buildings, dark and empty to anyone not looking closely, and then back again, her focus returning to the officers as if that glance had meant nothing at all, but her fingers, resting lightly against her thigh, shifted almost imperceptibly, a small adjustment, a signal not yet given. Brooks noticed the movement, or thought he did, and his voice tightened just enough to reveal it. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he said, slower now, more deliberate, and Ava complied without hesitation, lifting her hands slightly higher, palms open, the gesture precise, controlled, almost respectful, but there was no submission in it, no collapse, just alignment, like she was following a different set of rules entirely. The crowd across the street had grown, not larger in number, but heavier in presence. A man leaning against a mailbox. A woman standing beside a parked sedan with her arms folded, both watching in that quiet way people do when they sense something unfolding that they do not yet understand. And somewhere a phone finally lifted high enough to record, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light, capturing the stillness more than any action. Ava's mind moved differently than the moment suggested, not scattered, not overwhelmed, but focused, narrowing to the details that mattered, the angle of Brooks's stance, the spacing between the officers, the distance to the alley, measured not in steps, but in instinct, in memory. And beneath that, something older, something trained, something that had been taught not in classrooms, but in repetition, in discipline, in trust. She let another breath pass, slower this time, and the corners of her mouth tightened just slightly. Not a smile, not even close, just a recognition of what was about to shift. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the same calm as before, but with a weight that settled differently in the air. "Officer," she said, not as a challenge but as acknowledgement. And the word alone made Brooks pause, just for a fraction of a second, because it did not sound like fear, it did not sound like resistance. It sounded like someone who understood authority from the inside out. The pause was brief, almost invisible, but it was enough for the balance of the moment to tilt in a way no one present could yet see. And Ava's gaze held steady as her lips parted again, not to argue, not to explain, but to release something smaller, quieter, a sound so soft it barely seemed to exist at all, and yet it carried with it the kind of certainty that did not need volume to be heard. The sound left Ava Johnson's lips so softly that it barely seemed real, more like a breath shaped into intention than an actual signal, yet it settled into the air with a precision that did not belong to chance. And for a moment nothing happened, or at least nothing visible. Just the same suspended stillness stretching across the street, the same flicker of red and blue light sliding across the pavement, the same quiet tension held between people who did not yet understand they were standing at the edge of something shifting. Officer Daniel Brooks narrowed his eyes, searching for what he thought he had heard, his focus tightening as he leaned forward slightly, trying to catch the meaning behind a sound that did not fit the script in his mind. And the younger officer near the cruiser glanced toward the alley instinctively, though he could not have said why, as if something in the atmosphere had moved before anything in sight had followed. Ava remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her hands still open, her breathing even. But there was a subtle difference now, something in the way her shoulders settled, in the way her gaze softened not with submission but with certainty, like a calculation had reached its conclusion. The alley to her left remained dark for a heartbeat longer, then another, and then there was movement, not sudden, not chaotic, but deliberate, controlled, the kind of motion that did not announce itself with noise, but with presence. And two figures emerged from the shadow, low to the ground, moving in perfect alignment, their pace steady, their formation exact, as if guided by something unseen yet unquestionable. They did not rush, they did not bark, they did not break the silence, and that absence of chaos made the moment heavier than any sound could have, because it was not what anyone expected, not what Brooks had prepared for, not what the onlookers across the street could immediately understand, and yet every instinct in the space responded to it all at once. The dogs moved with a discipline that spoke before anything else could, their steps measured, their attention fixed, their presence unmistakable, and when they reached Ava's side, they stopped in perfect unison, one to her left, one to her right, their bodies still, their focus forward, not toward her, not toward the crowd, but toward the officers standing before them. And in that exact second the balance of the moment shifted completely. Brooks did not step back, not yet, but something in his stance changed, a fraction of an inch, a subtle adjustment that revealed more than any movement could have, his hand lowering just slightly from where it had hovered, his shoulders no longer pressing forward but holding, calculating, reassessing, because this was no longer the situation he believed he was controlling. The younger officer's radio crackled softly, breaking the silence for a split second before fading again, and he swallowed, his eyes moving from Ava to the dogs and back again, trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the assumptions he had made only moments earlier. Ava did not look down at them, did not reach for them, did not acknowledge them in any visible way, and that absence of reaction carried more weight than any command could have, because it meant this was not a surprise, not an accident, but a response, intentional and precise. The air felt different now, not lighter, not calmer, but clearer, as if something hidden had been revealed without explanation, and Brooks exhaled slowly, a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his voice quieter when it came again, less certain, less rigid. "Ma'am," he began, the word unfamiliar in his tone, and Ava's eyes met his once more, steady, unwavering, the faintest shift in her expression suggesting not triumph, not defiance, but something deeper, something rooted in a truth that did not need to be spoken, because it was already standing there in plain sight. Officer Brooks felt the shift before he could name it, a subtle unraveling of the certainty he had carried into the moment, and it showed not in what he said but in what he did not say, the silence stretching just a fraction longer than before as his eyes moved again between Ava Johnson and the two dogs standing at her side, their stillness more commanding than any motion could have been. They did not strain forward, did not react to the tension in the air. They simply held their positions with a precision that spoke of discipline far beyond anything casual, their attention fixed, their bodies aligned, and that quiet control unsettled something deep in Brooks's instincts, something he could not dismiss as coincidence. The younger officer shifted again, his stance loosening as if the ground beneath him had subtly changed, and his voice came low, almost hesitant. "Those are not regular dogs," he said, not as a question but as a realization, and Brooks did not respond immediately, because he was already arriving at the same conclusion, just slower, just more reluctantly. Ava remained on her knees, but there was nothing diminished in her presence, nothing reduced, the posture now reading differently in the new context, no longer compliance but composure, as if she had chosen stillness rather than been forced into it, and when she finally moved, it was minimal, deliberate, her hands lowering slightly but still visible, her shoulders easing as if the moment had already resolved in her mind even if it had not yet caught up to everyone else. The crowd across the street leaned in without stepping closer, the quiet pull of attention drawing them tighter into the scene. A man lowering his phone just enough to see over the screen, a woman's expression shifting from curiosity to something more focused, more aware, as the pieces began to form a picture none of them had expected. Brooks cleared his throat, the sound small against the weight of the silence, and when he spoke again, the edge that had been there before had softened, not gone, but altered. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to explain what is going on here." And the phrasing itself carried a difference, no longer an order, not quite a request, something in between, something searching for footing. Ava lifted her gaze fully to meet his, her expression calm, steady, and for the first time there was a hint of something else beneath it, not emotion exactly, but recognition, as if she had seen this shift before, as if she understood the exact moment when authority begins to question itself. She did not rush to answer, did not fill the space immediately, and that pause held its own kind of weight, forcing Brooks to remain in it, to stand inside uncertainty without the usual escape of control. And when she finally spoke, her voice was even, measured, carrying clearly across the small distance between them. "You approached me based on a description," she said, not accusing, not defensive, simply stating, and Brooks nodded once, almost reflexively, before catching himself, before realizing that he had responded without thinking. Ava continued, her tone unchanged. "And you assumed you understood what you were looking at." And again there was no edge, no confrontation, just clarity, and that clarity pressed harder than any raised voice could have. The dogs remained motionless, their presence anchoring the moment, a silent confirmation of something unspoken, and Brooks exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just enough to reveal the shift fully now. The transition from command to reconsideration, from certainty to awareness. He glanced briefly at his partner, then back at Ava, and for the first time since the encounter began, there was hesitation in his stance, not weakness, but recalibration, the kind that comes when a situation no longer fits the narrative you brought into it. Ava watched him without judgment, without urgency, simply present, and in that presence there was a quiet authority that did not need to be declared, because it was already understood by anyone paying attention, including the officers standing just a few feet away, caught now in a moment where the lines of power had shifted without a single raised voice, without a single sudden move, only through stillness, precision, and truth revealed in its own time. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling over the street like something heavy and deliberate, and for a moment no one moved. Not the officers, not the small cluster of onlookers, not even Ava Johnson, who remained exactly where she was, centered between the two dogs whose presence now felt less like an interruption and more like a statement that had always been there waiting to be seen. Officer Brooks shifted his stance again, but this time it was not to assert control, it was to find balance, to recalibrate in a situation that no longer responded to command the way he expected, and his eyes traced the lines of the dogs more carefully now, noting details he had missed before, the precision in their posture, the calm in their breathing, the way they held position without a single unnecessary movement, and something in that observation pressed against his understanding until it gave way to something else, something closer to recognition. The younger officer lowered his hand fully now, no longer hovering, his shoulders relaxing in a way that revealed his uncertainty more openly, and he glanced again at Brooks, this time not for direction, but for confirmation that what he was seeing was real, that this shift in the moment was not something imagined. Ava's gaze remained steady, but there was a quiet change in her expression, a softening that did not signal relief, but resolution, as if the outcome of this encounter had already settled within her long before it became visible to anyone else. And when she moved again it was subtle, her hands lowering just enough to rest naturally at her sides, her posture shifting from still compliance into something more grounded, more self-possessed, and the dogs mirrored that shift without instruction, their bodies easing by a fraction, not relaxing fully but adjusting in perfect sync with her presence. Brooks cleared his throat again, but this time the sound felt different, less like an interruption and more like an attempt to bridge a gap he had not anticipated, and his voice followed that change, quieter, more measured. "Ma'am, I need to understand what is happening here," he said, and the words carried an honesty that had not been there before, a recognition that he no longer held the full picture. Ava watched him for a long second, long enough for the weight of that question to settle, and when she finally responded her voice was calm, steady, carrying the kind of clarity that does not seek approval. "What is happening," she said, "is that you stopped the wrong person for the wrong reason." And the sentence landed without force yet carried through the space with undeniable weight, not as an accusation but as a fact placed gently but firmly into the center of the moment. The crowd shifted again, subtle movements of attention and understanding passing between them, a quiet murmur beginning to form but not yet breaking the stillness. And somewhere a car passed at the end of the block, its headlights sweeping briefly across the scene before disappearing, as if the outside world was continuing without noticing what had just changed here. Brooks inhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for just a fraction of a second before returning to Ava, and in that brief break there was something new, something that had not been present when the encounter began, not doubt exactly but awareness, the kind that follows when assumptions begin to unravel and leave space for something more accurate to take their place. He nodded once, almost unconsciously, and that small movement marked a turning point more clearly than anything else, because it was the first acknowledgement that the control he thought he held had never truly been his, and Ava saw it, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with the quiet recognition of someone who had seen this shift before and knew exactly what it meant. She did not stand yet, did not rush the moment forward. She simply remained where she was, grounded, present, allowing the realization to settle fully into the space. While the dogs beside her held their positions with unwavering focus, their presence no longer a surprise, but a confirmation. A silent reinforcement of a truth that no longer needed to be proven, only understood. The moment did not move forward the way tension usually demands. It did not snap or collapse or erupt. Instead, it settled into something quieter, something heavier, like the air itself had chosen to slow down and force everyone inside it to feel what had just shifted. And Ava Johnson remained still within that pause, her knees still touching the pavement, but her presence no longer grounded there. As if the surface beneath her no longer defined her position in the scene, a faint breeze moved down the street, carrying with it the dry scent of asphalt and distant traffic, brushing lightly against her jacket, lifting a loose strand of hair near her cheek. And for the first time since the encounter began, her eyes softened not toward the officers, but inward, toward something older, something remembered. The flashing lights from the patrol car reflected across the side of a nearby window, casting slow pulses of red and blue that stretched and faded across the glass, and Ava's gaze followed that reflection for just a second, as if watching something far beyond the street, something that had shaped the calm she carried now. She had stood in places louder than this, places where commands came faster, sharper, where decisions carried weight measured in seconds, not minutes. And those memories did not rise as images, but as feeling, as muscle memory, as breath control, as the quiet discipline that taught her when to act and when to wait. And here, in this small stretch of city street, that same discipline held her steady. The dogs beside her remained perfectly aligned, but even they seemed to absorb the stillness, their presence no longer tense but grounded, their breathing slow, controlled, matching the rhythm she set without any visible signal. And that synchronization created a kind of quiet harmony in the space, something that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty lingering in the officers. Brooks did not speak immediately, and that silence from him carried its own significance, because it was no longer the silence of control, it was the silence of thought, of reassessment, of someone standing at the edge of understanding and realizing that stepping forward required letting go of what he had assumed just minutes before. The younger officer shifted his weight again, but this time it was subtle, almost respectful, his posture. No longer angled forward, but neutral, as if he had unconsciously stepped out of a stance he no longer felt certain about. Across the street, the small crowd had quieted completely. No whispers now, no movement of phones, just attention, focused and still, as if everyone present understood that something important was unfolding not through action but through restraint. Ava inhaled slowly, the breath filling her chest, and then releasing just as evenly. And when she moved, it was not abrupt, not reactive, but intentional, her hands lowering fully now to rest at her sides, her shoulders settling into a natural alignment. And then, without any urgency, she began to rise, not quickly, not defensively, but with the same measured control that had defined every movement she had made so far. The dogs adjusted with her, standing as she stood, their positions shifting in perfect coordination, never breaking formation, never losing focus, and that seamless motion reinforced what had already become clear, that this was not coincidence, not chance, but training, discipline, connection built over time and trust. Brooks watched closely, but he did not interrupt, did not issue another command, and that absence of instruction marked the moment more clearly than anything else, because it showed that he no longer believed control required his voice. Ava reached her full height and faced him directly, her posture calm, her expression composed, and in that quiet exchange there was no longer a question of who held authority, only an understanding that it had never been where he first assumed, and the street remained silent, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something that lingered in the space between them, waiting not to be declared but simply to be acknowledged. Officer Brooks held her gaze, and in that moment something finally aligned in his mind, not as a sudden realization, but as a slow, undeniable recognition, the kind that settles into place piece by piece until it cannot be ignored. And his eyes moved once more to the dogs standing beside Ava Johnson, taking in their posture again, the discipline in their stillness, the way they did not react to noise, to movement, to pressure. And that was when it clicked fully, not just what they were, but what that meant about her. His jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance but in recalibration, and his voice, when it came, carried a different weight now, quieter, more careful. "Those dogs, they are trained," he said, not asking, not guessing, but confirming something he already knew deep down. And Ava did not respond immediately, because she did not need to, because the truth was already visible in everything around her. The younger officer glanced between them, his expression shifting as the realization reached him as well, slower but just as certain, his shoulders lowering further as the tension that once drove his stance dissolved into something closer to respect. Brooks exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry away the last of his earlier certainty. And then he straightened, not in authority, but in acknowledgement, his posture no longer pressing forward but standing level, equal. And when he spoke again, the change was unmistakable. "Are you military?" The question came. Carefully, not as a challenge, but as a recognition of something earned. Ava's eyes met his, steady as before, and for the first time there was a faint shift in her expression, not pride, not defiance, just a quiet acceptance of what no longer needed to remain unspoken, and she gave a small nod. Once, controlled, enough to confirm without elaborating. The air shifted again, but this time it was not tension, it was clarity, and that clarity moved through the space like a ripple, reaching the younger officer first, then the onlookers across the street, then settling fully between Ava and Brooks, where it transformed the entire meaning of the encounter. Brooks looked down briefly, just a fraction of a second, then back up, and in that small motion there was something deeper than hesitation. There was recognition of error, of assumption, of a narrative he had stepped into without question and now had to step out of. "Ma'am," he said again, but this time the word carried respect fully formed. No hesitation, no edge. "I did not have that information." And the sentence was not an excuse, not quite an apology yet, but something close, something beginning. Ava held his gaze, her expression unchanged, not softening further, not hardening either, simply present. And in that presence there was no need to press, no need to respond immediately, because the moment was already turning on its own. The dogs remained still, their attention unwavering, but their presence no longer carried tension, it carried confirmation, like a quiet line drawn between what had been assumed and what was now understood. Brooks shifted his weight again, but this time it was deliberate, a step not forward, not back, but slightly to the side, creating space where there had been pressure, and that small movement spoke louder than anything he could have said, because it acknowledged without words that the control he had tried to assert no longer belonged to him. The younger officer mirrored that shift unconsciously, stepping back half a pace. His posture open now, no longer angled for command but for awareness, and across the street the crowd seemed to exhale collectively, though no sound broke the silence. Ava stood there, centered, composed, her presence unchanged from the beginning except now it was fully seen, no longer filtered through assumption, no longer reduced by misunderstanding, and the street held that truth quietly, not needing to announce it, because it had already reshaped everything in its path. The shift had already happened, but now it settled fully into place, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain, just present and undeniable, and Officer Brooks stood in it with a stillness that did not come from authority, but from understanding, his posture no longer rigid, no longer pressing forward, but grounded in something quieter, something more aware. And when he looked at Ava Johnson this time, he was no longer searching for answers to confirm his assumptions. He was acknowledging the truth that had been in front of him all along. His hand moved slowly away from his belt, not in a dramatic gesture, not in a performance, just a natural release of something he no longer needed. And the younger officer followed without being told, mirroring the motion as if the moment itself had rewritten the rules they had been standing on. The street seemed to breathe again, not loudly, not all at once, but gradually, like tension dissolving into the night air, and the flashing lights from the patrol car no longer felt sharp or urgent, just distant, almost out of place in a scene that had transformed without force. Brooks cleared his throat once more, but this time the sound carried no weight of command, only the intention to speak clearly. "Ma'am," he said, and the word landed differently now. Steady, respectful, complete. There has been a misunderstanding, and the sentence did not rush itself, did not try to move past what had happened. It simply stood there, honest in its simplicity. Ava listened. Without interruption, her expression unchanged, her presence calm, and in that calm there was no need for her to respond immediately, no need to fill the space with words, because the meaning of the moment was already unfolding on its own. Brooks continued, his voice even, measured. We received a call, a description that led us here, but it is clear now that we approached this situation without the full context. And as he spoke, his gaze did not drift, did not avoid hers, it held steady, carrying the weight of accountability in a way that did not need to be emphasized. The younger officer glanced briefly at Ava, then at the dogs, then back to Brooks, as if aligning himself with the shift that had already taken place, his stance open, no longer guarded, no longer prepared for confrontation, but present in the same understanding. Ava let a small breath pass, not a sigh, not relief, just a natural release of the moment's tension, and when she spoke, her voice remained exactly as it had been from the beginning, calm, grounded, unchanged by the shift around her. Assumptions can do that, she said, and the words carried no accusation, no bitterness, just clarity, the kind that leaves space for reflection rather than reaction. Brooks nodded once, a small movement, but one that carried more meaning than anything else he had done since the encounter began, because it acknowledged not just the situation, but the lesson within it, the recognition that what he had believed at the start had not been enough, and that realization now stood between them, quiet but complete. The dogs remained at Ava's side, their presence steady, no longer a disruption, no longer a surprise, just part of the truth that had been revealed. And as the moment settled further, their stillness seemed to anchor everything around them, reinforcing the calm that had replaced the earlier tension. Across the street, the small crowd began to shift again, subtle movements, a phone lowering, a step back, the quiet understanding that the moment they had witnessed was no longer unfolding. It had already resolved, and there was nothing more to see except what remained in the silence. Ava stood there, composed, her gaze steady, and for a brief second, the space between her and Brooks held something unspoken but understood. Not conflict, not victory, but recognition, the kind that does not need to be declared because it has already changed everything. The moment did not end with a command or a final word. It simply began to dissolve, slowly, naturally, like tension releasing its grip on the space it once controlled, and Ava Johnson stood in that quiet shift without needing to mark it, without needing to claim it, because what had changed did not require acknowledgement. It was already understood. Officer Brooks stepped back first, not abruptly, not as retreat, but as recognition, creating space where there had once been pressure, his posture no longer angled toward control but toward balance, and the younger officer followed a second later, mirroring that movement without hesitation, as if the moment itself had guided them both to the same place. The patrol car lights continued to flash, but now they felt distant, almost irrelevant, their reflections sliding across the pavement without urgency, and the low hum of the engine blended back into the background of the night, no longer defining the scene. Ava reached down calmly and picked up her duffel bag, the motion simple, unhurried, her fingers steady as they closed around the handle, and when she straightened, the dogs shifted with her in perfect coordination, stepping into place at her sides without a sound, their presence no longer signaling anything, just existing, grounded, aligned. Brooks watched her for a brief moment, as if considering whether to say something more, but whatever words might have formed did not come, and instead he gave a small nod, not formal, not rehearsed, just real, and in that nod there was acknowledgement, not only of her, but of everything that had just unfolded. Ava met his gaze for a second, her expression calm, unchanged, and then she turned, not sharply, not with any sense of finality, just a natural movement forward, her boots stepping lightly against the pavement as she began to walk down the street, the dogs moving with her in perfect rhythm, their pace matching hers exactly, their presence quiet and steady. The crowd across the street parted slightly without being asked, giving her space as she passed, their attention following her not with curiosity anymore, but with a kind of respect that had replaced whatever assumptions they had carried before, and one by one, phones lowered, conversations stilled, until the street returned to its ordinary shape. The officers remained where they were, watching her go, not speaking, not moving to stop her, because there was nothing left to question, nothing left to control, only the understanding that the moment had already reached its conclusion. Ava continued down the block, her figure gradually moving beyond the reach of the flashing lights, beyond the edge of the scene, and as she did, the sounds of the city returned in full. Distant traffic, a car door closing somewhere, the faint echo of footsteps on concrete, all blending back into the rhythm of the night. The dogs stayed close at her sides, their silhouettes steady against the dim streetlights, and as she passed under the next pool of light, her shadow stretched forward across the pavement, long and quiet, moving ahead of her without resistance. Behind her, the street settled completely, the tension gone, the space returning to stillness, and no one said anything. Because nothing needed to be said, the silence itself, carrying the weight of what had been seen, what had been understood, and what would not be forgotten.